As the movie opens, a couple of shoes dangle from a telephone wire, while kids play on the street, pretending to be beating each other, in a reflection of what they have seen happening so many times, in the poor and violent neighborhood. Under a railway bridge painted with colorful graffiti in the same neighborhood, a thin man in his late 20s with shaggy light hair and green soulful eyes watches a group of young skaters and bikers doing tricks in a skate park. His name is Frankie, and he is envious of the carefreeness that the young boys have. He's not much older than them, and already has too many responsibilities to take on. That day in particular is his nephew's birthday, and he has no money to buy him a gift. That weighs on Frankie's mind because his nephew deserves to have more in life than a broke substances seller as an uncle, and a mother who likes to search for the meaning of life in the bottom of a bottle. For that reason, his previously wistful look sharpens when a biker leaves his bike unattended. Frankie quickly takes the bike and rides it as fast as he can while the owner screams and runs after him in the middle of the street. He goes to the apartment complex where he stays with his sister, Patty, and his nephew, Sean. Sean is a young teenager that is just turning 15, and Patty is his careless mother. In that house, Frankie is the most responsible adult, which also doesn't mean much since he risks his life and freedom by selling substances. Yet, he has a sense of debt to Sean that his own mother doesn't have. Frankie doesn't want Sean to have the same disappointing life that his whole family has, living in a dangerous neighborhood, selling substances to put food on the table, or, in the case of Frankie's father and Patty, being an addict. Frankie hides the bike so that Sean doesn't see it before entering his apartment. The bike is Sean's birthday gift, and Frankie wants it to be a surprise to the young teen. He pretends not to remember that it's Sean's birthday, and the teenager complains to him about it. Frankie then chuckles and tells Sean that he wants to show him something. When Sean sees the cool bike, he gets really happy because he had no idea his uncle was going to give him such a nice gift. He has no idea that the bike is stolen. Patty arrives with a cheap cake for Sean, and instead of saying happy birthday to Sean or commenting on his new bike, she asks Frankie if he paid the rent. Sean wants to ride his new bike, so he asks his mother for permission. When Sean leaves, Frankie follows Patty inside their dingy house and watches her drinking a glass full of wine in almost one gulp with judging eyes. Frankie doesn't care for Patty's drinking at all. It reminds him of their father's own issues with addiction, and he knows it's a narrow path that leads straight to misery with no stop on the way. Patty feels tired and sick of her life, and instead of trying to change it for the better, she prefers to drink to feel good for a couple of hours. Frankie wonders if Patty remembered it's Sean's birthday since she didn't even wish the boy a happy birthday, and Patty scoffs at him and points out that she bought Sean a cake. With nothing else to say to his sister, Frankie leaves her drinking her problems away and goes into her bedroom to look for a picture of his mother. The room is in a state of disarray with an empty bottle of wine at her bedside table and a tray full of cigarettes. He opens one of her drawers and finds a gun amongst pictures of their mother. He's surprised at the sight of it since he didn't even know Patty had a reason to keep a gun. Sean has fun with his new bike and his friends while Sean watches. He doesn't like some of Sean's friends because he recognizes them as sellers of substances. His biggest fear is that Sean will end up selling or using, so the fact that he has friends that sell worry him. Later on, Frankie goes around the neighborhood in his skateboard selling substances. People already know Frankie, so he doesn't have to make a lot of effort to sell. It's easy money, but most of it goes to his supplier, which means Frankie has to sell a lot of the substances to make any real money. In the evening, after he comes back from work, they celebrate Sean's birthday with the cake Patty bought. It's a sad affair, a teenager living in a broken household celebrating his life with his wasted mother and his miserable uncle. Sean doesn't seem to mind his situation, though. He's still quite happy that he got a brand new bike as a birthday gift. The following day, Sean is at a diner waiting for his good-for-nothing father to appear for their weekly lunch. His father's name is Michael, and he is addicted to the same substances that Frankie sells. The man is old and bedraggled by the constant abuse of substances, and his mind is fractionated already. By the way his pupils are dilated and his misplaced euphoria, Frankie instantly acknowledges that he's out of his rational mind at the moment. He asks him if he was in the bathroom, and his father jokingly answers that he was having stomach problems. That's why he was in the bathroom. Frankie doesn't believe a word that leaves his mouth and tells him that he doesn't want to hang out with him when he's using. Michael again promises Frankie that he's not under the influence and disturbs the peace in the diner to prove it to him. The meeting goes downhill from there. His father makes jokes about Patty's choice in men with racist undertones and tells Frankie to get out of his high horse because he's going to look just like him when he gets older. Frankie quickly gets fed up with his father's behavior, especially when insisting comparing the two of them, and stomps out of the restaurant. His father is a sore spot for him exactly because his words hit too close to Frankie's fear of becoming a second version of Michael. The fact that he's halfway there with his illicit job disturbs him more than he's willing to admit. With nothing to do about his current situation, he runs away from it and from the glaring reality that his father represents. Later on, Frankie and Sean are having some fun skating together when a girl with a camera suddenly starts taking pictures of them without even asking first. The girl is petite, with dark shaggy hair and uncommon facial features. She wears casual clothes, but the professional camera she's holding makes it obvious that she has money. She was taking pictures of the city when she noticed Frankie and Sean skating. As any good photographer would do, she sees the two men as an opportunity to capture the moment. Standing a few feet away from them, she takes pictures of Sean skating. Frankie notices her taking pictures of his nephew and stares. It takes some time for the girl to notice him watching her. When she does, she turns the camera to him and boldly starts taking pictures of him instead. Frankie is bashful, but he also finds it funny. The girl smiles at him before turning and leaving the park. Frankie watches her go with a soft smile on his face, curious about the strange girl taking pictures of random people. When Frankie and Sean come back home after a day of fun together, Patty asks Sean to go around the corner of their street and change her EBT card for some money. She looks tired, with dark circles around her eyes and another glass full of wine in her hand. Frankie complains to her that she shouldn't send Sean to change her EBT card for money because and he could be caught. Patty nonchalantly waves him off, not worried at all about her son being caught because he's a minor. She tries to justify it by saying that she's giving him part of the money for his birthday anyway, as if that made it right. Sean's disdain for his sister's lack of worries when it comes to Sean is palpable. It's as if Patty doesn't care about Sean beyond his basic needs. Frankie, on the other hand, is constantly worried that his nephew is going to turn out just like them, even more so now that he knows Sean is hanging out with some kids who also sellers of substances. Frankie drives with his supplier and friend, Willie, to his appointment at the courthouse to his hearing. Willie was caught after robbing a delivery guy, something that Frankie laughs about because it's so stupid. When they are going back to their neighborhood, they see a homeless man buying something from a man in a truck. Willie immediately asks Frankie to stop the car so he can interrogate the guy in the truck. Things get real for Frankie really quickly when Willie grabs a gun and goes after the guy. Selling substances while skating is way different from threatening to eliminate people in the middle of the afternoon. If he was caught with Willie while he's carrying a gun right after he was released from jail, he could get in trouble. Turns out Willie finds out there's someone else trying to sell on his territory and warns the guy in the truck to not go back there, otherwise he would be checked out. No one catches them threatening the man, which is a relief for Frankie. Life goes on for Frankie. Every day he goes out to sell his products and he even takes money from other sellers, which is a big responsibility. During one of his journeys around the city, he meets the photography girl again and decides to talk to her. The girl seems to be happy that he recognized her, something that encourages Frankie to continue talking with her. She doesn't speak, though she can understand what he says by reading his lips. Instead, she uses her phone to answer him. Her name's Jane. Without wasting any time, Frankie tells Jane that he thinks she's beautiful and wants to walk with her. Jane thinks he's bold to ask something like that from a complete stranger, but she also finds Frankie interesting, so she concedes. They walk in complete silence, sharing secret glances and smiles every once in a while. Frankie walks her to the rich part of the town. When they arrive in front of a townhouse, Jane motions that it's her house. Frankie doesn't think twice before asking to see her again, but Jane hesitates to say yes. She points out to his phone and writes her number there so that he can message her and set a date. Before she enters her house, Jane smiles brightly at Frankie and waves goodbye. Frankie, who usually looks aloof and kind of sad, smiles at her with a hopeful look. It will be good to forget his harsh reality for a moment and just hang out with the pretty girl. He's so infatuated with Jane that he even starts learning sign language between his jobs. They plan a date and Frankie takes Jane around places in town that she probably has never been to. Places that, despite looking run down and dilapidated at first, for the right eye could be seen as art. Frankie asks questions about Jane and learns that she wasn't born deaf. She explains to him through a message that she remembers sounds like a dog barking or a car's honking. The one sound that she misses the most, though, is the sound of her dad's voice. Frankie asks her to teach him some words in sign language, and he uses that as an excuse to ask her to kiss him. Jane blushes and smiles prettily, nodding her head at him and sealing their fate together from there on. They kiss on top of a rock filled with graffiti drawings, with the view of the city's bridge in the distance. For a time, Frankie's life turns to the bright side because of Jane. She has a light around her that makes him see a future that is less miserable and tragic, and a smile that makes his heart jump in his chest. In turn, Frankie brings a different view of life to Jane. He takes her to places she would never have been to because it's so distant from her reality. Still, despite their differences in life, they merge well. Frankie even introduces her to Sean, which is a big deal and shows how into her he really is because Sean is the most important person in his life. On the other hand, though she's infatuated with Frankie, Jane doesn't show or talk about her own life as much. Days go by and soon the day for Frankie's weekly lunch with his dad arrives. Differently from the last time, when he was euphoric and out of his mind, Michael is sober. He's really thin and sickly looking, with his clothes hanging off his exploited body. One of his hands is busted at the knuckles, and when Frankie points it out, Jarvis tells him that he got hurt breaking car windows to take whatever is inside the car. Frankie is in such good spirits that he doesn't even bother his father about his choice in work. He even asks Michael to tell him if he finds tickets to something nice. Michael notices that there's something different about Frankie and pesters him until Frankie tells him that he met a girl. Michael rolls his eyes and tells Frankie not to get the girl pregnant because that's how his own life was messed up. When Frankie talks a bit more about Jane, including the fact that she's deaf, his father makes fun of them, mainly of Jane's deafness. Michael is a bitter man, even more so when he's sober, and despite the fact that he's a good-for-nothing father, Frankie is worried about him. When he's not under the euphoric effects of the substances he uses, he's depressed and miserable. Frankie tells him that he needs to eat and take care of himself more, because one day he wants his kids to know him as a grandfather. Michael thinks Frankie is ridiculous for thinking about his future with a girl that's obviously from a different reality than his. He states that Frankie can't admit that he's bad, that he ruins people's lives for money. Despite being an addict himself, Michael is surprisingly serious when he tells Frankie that no matter what he tells himself to make himself feel good, he's still partly responsible for the problems people like Michael have because he enables them to feed their addiction. His father's words are like a slap on Frankie's face. He wonders what sweet Jane would think if she knew what he does for a living, and if his father is right when he said that Frankie is as bad as he is. Frankie's little bubble of happiness bursts when he's pulled even deeper into the business. Turns out the man above Willie and Frankie's other boss, Jarvis, is upset about people invading his turf to sell substances. It's supposed to be Frankie's job to threaten these people when he sees them invading. But Jarvis knows that Frankie doesn't have what it takes to actually intimidate someone, so he threatens Frankie that he's going to call his hitman Stefan, who is not afraid to solve the issue through violence. Frankie tells him that he's going to solve the problem by himself, and Jarvis accepts it for the moment. They see a kid of about Sean's age selling in Jarvis' corner, and he threatens the kid about what would happen if he sees him working there again. When Jarvis leaves, Frankie can't help but be reminded of Sean and imagining him in that kid's situation, being threatened by an adult for doing something they shouldn't be doing. Moving on, Frankie momentarily lets go of his issues to meet Jane's parents. Frankie gets dressed in more formal clothes and even leaves his cap behind. Jane's parents, Nancy and Mark, are the perfect examples of model parents. They are also very rich. Mark simply helped develop security cameras and has a successful company that provides security services for the government buildings all over the city, and Nancy is a retired lawyer that became a stay-at-home mom to take care of Jane. They have both attended college and have extremely high expectations for Jane. Frankie had no chance, and it seems Jane gave them the wrong information about him, because they think he has a little brother, and that he resides with his mother, instead of his sister. Frankie explains that he doesn't have a stable job, rather works at whatever he can to provide for his nephew and sister. Mark asks what he studies, and Frankie informs them that he never had the opportunity to go to school, but that if he could, he would have become a juvenile probation officer. While Mark and Nancy scrutinize Frankie, they don't include Jane in the conversation at all. When Frankie asks what she wants to do for a living, she's interrupted by her mother, who says Jane has always wanted to be a doctor. What is more, she's going to another state next fall to enroll in med school. Frankie masks his surprise since never once did Jane mention going away or wanting to become a doctor. He asks why she decided to attend that particular university, and again her parents interrupt her and answer that it's because there's a deaf professor in the department there. Jane finally lets her parents know that she's bothered that they don't let her talk about herself. She apologizes to Frankie, but he waves her off. After dinner, Frankie and Jane hang out in front of her house. Frankie tells her that she could have told him that she was going to another state to study, and she apologizes for not mentioning it. The fact is that Jane doesn't want to be a doctor, like her mother said. She wants to be a photographer. She can't say that to her parents, though, not when they have such successful careers in their respective fields. She doesn't want to disappoint them. Jane asks Frankie if he's going to miss her, and he doesn't reply. He feels sad to know that not only does their relationship not have a future, like he hoped for, but he had even told his parents that he's thinking about kids and a future with Jane. Yet, Jane barely talked about him to her parents and told them wrong things about his life that would make him look better. Like the fact that he has a sister who is a single mother, and he has to support her and Sean. His mother has passed away years back, and his father is an addict that he sees once every 2 weeks. Meanwhile, Jane has married parents that are successful and only want the best for their daughter. Frankie isn't the best. In fact, according to his own father, he's the worst. He doesn't even tell Jane that he will miss her, so of course he is the worst. She gave him hope, which is something that he didn't have for a long time. She let him experience a normal life, one where he didn't need to worry about putting food on the table, or doing questionable things in order to survive. At the same time, their moments together were very superficial, to the point where they don't know important things about one another. It makes Frankie wonder if he was just a passing fancy for Jane, one last summer adventure before she has to leave for college, where her real life is going to begin. Frankie leaves Jane's house with a decision to make. Either he ends things with her for good, because nothing will come of their relationship, or he stops thinking that his life is already figured out because his father is an addict, his mother has passed away, and his sister is a single mother on her way to become an addict. He's still young and he has the opportunity of making something better of himself. For him, for Sean, and for Jane. With his decision made, he drives towards a JED center. His house is silent and dark when he arrives. He calls for Sean or Patty but no one answers. When he goes upstairs, though, he sees his sister passed out on her own vomit. She overdosed. Immediately Frankie calls out for Sean and the boy helps him take his mother to the hospital. It's an awful situation to find a loved one in. Even more for Sean to see his mother like that. To take his mind out of it, Frankie goes on a trip with Sean and Jane to her summer house. Although Frankie is excited about it, Sean is worried about his mother and can't take his mind off the way they found her. While Frankie and Jane are having fun in the pool, goofing around and pretending everything is alright, Sean is on the phone with his mother. Patty tells him that he's ungrateful for leaving her alone at the hospital, and that Frankie is a bad influence on him. Frankie notices that Sean seems upset, and the teenager tells him what his mother said. Frankie can't believe in Patty's gall to say that he's the bad influence in their household, not when she's the one only caring about herself and her needs. He tells Sean that they are like brothers, despite being uncle and nephew, and that he should learn from his mistakes. He let Patty control his life when he was younger. She was the one to put him on the streets to sell substances, and he didn't want the same to happen with Sean. He advises him to finish school, go to college and follow his dreams, and to not worry about anything besides having fun because Frankie would always take care of him. It's a beautiful bonding moment between them. One that shows Frankie's unbent support and love for Sean, the worry he feels for his future and how he wishes he can succeed and leave that miserable life behind. Sean is grateful for Frankie and what he represents to him. Because despite what Michael or Patty say about Frankie, he's a good guy that lost his way when no one was there to help him move in the right direction. The people responsible for him let him down, but he won't do the same for Sean. After the day in Jane's house, Sean starts hanging out more with Frankie, even going to a party that Frankie throws at their house with Willie and some other friends. Jane is also there, and they finally get intimate for the first time. The following day, Patty comes back home from the hospital by herself. She's frantic, barely talks to Sean before going around the house looking for her drinks. Frankie informs her that he threw it all away and she gets angry at him for that, as if just a few days before she hadn't overdosed on too much alcohol. Patty wants more and asks Sean for the money he got from selling his bike. Frankie didn't even know that Sean had sold his bike, and Patty throws on his face that he wasn't aware because he's been away the whole week. It's time for Frankie to get upset and ask her if he's not allowed to be happy after all that he does for them. They get into a huge argument when Frankie tells her that he's moving out, and Patty threatens to never let him see Sean again. Patty thinks Frankie has a debt to her because she raised him after their mother passed away and their father left them. Frankie promised to take care of Sean because he knew Patty wasn't a good mother figure, and she was getting worse with time. It's a tough situation that Frankie has to deal with, and he doesn't want to lose Sean. His only saving grace and light in the end of the tunnel is Jane. Frankie continues studying sign languages and going on dates with her. He also goes out more with Jarvis, getting deeper into the business without even realizing it. The time to meet his father comes again, but this time Michael doesn't show up. The owner of the diner that they always go to, Rosie, feels sorry for Frankie and advises him to not waste too much time praying that his father gets better. Frankie isn't worried about his father at the moment. The only people paying rent in his mind are Sean and Jane. He admits to Rosie that he loves her, but he doesn't know what to do about the relationship. Jane is still going to college, and Frankie made his peace with it. In fact, he supports her to go and follow her dreams if it's what she wants, because he knows what it's like when you waste life away. The issue for Frankie is that he doesn't think he's good enough for her, something that Rosie disagrees with. She tells him that what matters in a relationship isn't the money or the education the person has, but how well your partner treats you. Rosie also tells Frankie a surprising piece of information regarding his father, that he was a good man who loved his kids very much, and that Frankie's mother was the one to not treat him well. She advises him to enjoy life while he can and to stop being a wimp. It gives some food for thought to Frankie. After leaving the diner, Frankie goes after his father, worried that something bad happened to him. He finds him under the bridge, experiencing withdrawal effects. He's shaking like a leaf while holding his bloodied hand. When Frankie approaches, he begs him for substances to clear his head, or money. Frankie refuses to help his father indulge in his addiction. But Michael insists so much that Frankie almost relents. At the last minute, before he gives his father something from his own products, he decides to call the police and say that an addict is breaking car windows. As he waits for the police to appear, Frankie sadly watches what his father became because of the substances that he sells. Michael doesn't have control over his mind or body anymore. He's lost in the world of pain and misery that comes from depending on something, to have a sliver of happiness or relief from a harsh reality. Watching his father getting arrested because he called the cops reminds Frankie of all the things wrong in his life. He goes to Jane's house, trying to find some relief to the pain he's feeling, and there, she tells him that she knows what he does for a living. She figured it out. She doesn't seem angry, though. She just feels bad that he has to have that kind of life, and asks him to go with her when she leaves for college. But Frankie can't leave Sean behind. He's still the priority in his life, despite being completely in love with Jane and her being his lifeline. Jane decides to give up her life to be with him, then, because she loves him and doesn't want to leave without him. It's a bittersweet feeling to hear her say that she loves him. It's all that Frankie wished for, someone to love him fully, regardless of his choices in life or the fact that he has only his heart to offer her. On the other hand, Frankie sees the destruction in his family. He remembers what Rosie said about his parents, how his mother pushing Michael away helped him become an addict. He sees the way his sister acts, following their father's footsteps to a path that is very hard to come back from. Then, there's Sean, a boy who is growing up seeing his mother overdose and his friends entering a lawless life. He can never let the same that happened to him happen to Sean. Frankie finds himself at a crossroad, the love he feels he doesn't deserve, and the love he would for. He chooses the latter. After telling Jane that he doesn't love her and that he just used her, Frankie is thrown away from her house by a very angry Jane. He leaves with the weight of the world on his shoulders, and the surety that there is at least one life that he isn't going to mess up. He moves out from his house with Patty and Sean to a smaller apartment with the help of Willie. When they are chilling out after the move, Frankie admits that he messed up with Jane, and Willie gives him advice to apologize to her and get his life straight, because the life they have gives them only two options in the future: either he gets arrested, or he gets eliminated. It's sound advice that makes Frankie realize that he's not the only one that was dealt a bad hand in life. Willie tried to get straight, but he couldn't find any job because of his file. He also had responsibilities to his grandma, similar to how Frankie felt responsible for Sean. Regardless of all this, Willie still graduated from high school, so he gives Frankie hope that he can get at least that done. A couple of days later, when he goes back to Patty's house, he sees Sean selling in the middle of the street. That's the last drop on Frankie's cup, and he even slaps Sean when he catches him doing exactly what he told him not to. He tried so hard to keep him out of that life, and only a few days after he moved, Patty made her own kid go sell in exchange for money. Frankie takes the substances from Sean and goes to the person who gave them to him in the first place. It's Stefan, Jarvis Hitman and Patty's new boyfriend. He tells him to stay away from Sean, but Stefan denies it and even threatens Frankie. It was the wrong move to use Sean like that. Frankie gets so angry that he violently smashes a brick on the guy's head, then takes Sean from his deranged mother. The day for Jane to leave arrives, and Frankie goes to her house one last time to see her leaving. He watches from afar as her parents say goodbye to her. Jane sees him standing on the other side of the street and she's confused. After all, Frankie not only said that he didn't love her, but that she was just a distraction for him. Frankie signs that he's sorry. Jane watches him for a moment, then enters the car and leaves. It's only a moment after Frankie turns to go back home, with his head down and sadness pouring out of him, when Jane runs in his direction and almost tackles him. She hugs him with everything she has, and it's like she's holding all his broken pieces together. She tells him that she loves him, and he replies that he loves her too. Then, Jane runs back to her father's car, on her way to college, and Frankie goes back to his house. Later that same day, Frankie gets a call in the middle of the night, about other people selling stuff on Jarvis turf again. He has to go there with Willie and two other guys to scare the guys away. They are fighting when suddenly a shot fires. Everyone runs away, leaving Frankie behind with Stefan. He's holding a gun and looking at Frankie with a menacing expression. It's only the fact that Frankie also works for Jarvis that prevents Stefan from firing at him. Not willing to take his chances, Frankie turns around and runs. He goes straight to Jarvis' house, wondering why he called the hitman when they were dealing with a bunch of teenagers. Someone could have gotten hurt. Jarvis doesn't care about that. He only cares that they were invading his territory, and that was bad for business. Tired of people forcing his hand all the time, Frankie quits his job and leaves. Some days go by, his father is released from jail and he's going to Narcotics Anonymous meetings. Michael looks much better and put together after getting clean, and Frankie is happy for him. At least one good thing came out from his decisions from the last couple of months. His father even apologizes for being a bad parent and for not giving his children a life they deserved. Michael promises that he will make it up for them now that he's sober, and that's all Frankie really wants from him. For him to take care of himself for once, and stop using the substances that take away all his dignity as a person. He even tells Frankie that he has a job and offers Frankie to come work with him. Frankie accepts since he needs the money now that he isn't selling substances anymore. They hang out together after their heartfelt conversation and even watch a game together, something they hadn't done in ages. It felt good for Frankie to get a sense of closure from his father, even if it doesn't last in the future. Back at his place, his life with Sean is going well. They had always had a great relationship and it transfers for their livelihood. Sean is very smart and a good student, so he helps Frankie study for his test. He also starts working as a painter with his dad and learns that even with a job that doesn't pay all that well, he can enjoy it as an art form and express himself on the walls he's painting. Things are finally looking good for Frankie, even without Jane in his life. The only loose end that he needs to tie is Stefan. Whenever he sees Frankie, he threatens him somehow, and it's only a matter of time before he acts on his threats, especially now that Frankie doesn't work for Jarvis anymore. One day, the day of Patty's birthday, Sean and Frankie are planning on throwing her a party at her place. They set to meet each other after Sean's class, so after work, Frankie goes to a flower shop to buy Patty bouquet as a gift. Meanwhile, Sean is going there to meet Frankie when he sees Stefan holding a gun and walking towards Frankie. Frankie's back is turned, so he doesn't see the man approaching, until it's too late. Sean runs to warn him and gets in front of the shot. Stefan fires and hits Sean. It happens so fast that Frankie doesn't have time to react. When he realizes what happened, though, that Sean, the boy he has taken care of since he was just a baby, the one he has done everything in his power to protect, passes away because of Stefan, his mind blanks. He goes to Patty's house, still holding her bouquet, and grabs a gun from a kitchen cabinet. Patty keeps pestering him to know what happened, and without preamble or emotion in his voice, he informs her that her child is gone. It's only when Patty yells at him that he snaps and yells back that Sean passed away because of her. Because of her boyfriend. He leaves Patty crying and screaming in pain about her son passing away, and gets in the car with his friends. On their way to finding Stefan, Frankie's whole life passes through his eyes. He remembers Sean, the most important person in his life, his little brother for all intents and purposes, taking his last breaths. Sean was going to have a good life. Frankie would have done anything in his power to make sure of it. He would never have to sell substances to put food on the table like Frankie, or be an addict like Patty or Michael. He wouldn't be wasted away like their entire family. He was a smart kid, a good student. His future could have been brilliant. Now there is one thing that is certain for Frankie. Stefan wouldn't see the light of day again. They finally find Stefan and Frankie leave his friends in the car to deal with him by himself. He's ready to do that. To take a life for a life. What comes after doesn't matter to him. He's holding the gun, ready to take aim and shoot when someone does that before he can. Patty arrives before Frankie and she's the one to avenge her son's passing. Frankie watches it all unfold without moving a muscle. Patty sits down next to the scene and waits for the police to arrive while drinking her last bottle for the foreseeable future. Frankie's friends take him away from there forcefully, and Frankie tearfully watches his sister drinking her sorrows away while the sound of sirens approaches. In one day, more than half his family is lost to him. Instead of wallowing in his misery or turning into another addict, Frankie turns his loss into an opportunity to finally change. It's the last kick he needed to proceed with his education, and even try for a position as a juvenile probation officer, as he wished to. Helping kids that are lost in life, and sometimes only need someone to push them forward, instead of setting them back, is everything that Frankie could have wanted. In the last scene of the movie, Frankie appears in a kid's house as a juvenile probation officer, in the same neighborhood he has lived in his whole life, and where Sean took his last breath. He also got married and had a baby with a woman he loves.